Hello and welcome to the 16th lesson of this Excel course. I'm Sumit Bansal, and in this video we will learn more about Excel formulas. In the previous couple of videos we have learned about standalone Excel formulas. In this video we will see some practical examples of these formulas and how they come together to give us the result we want. Let's get started by looking at the first example. In this first example, I'll show you how to compare lists. So for example, if you have a list and you get a list from a colleague, or you have a list in different worksheets, then you may require these lists to tally with each other, and you may have to compare each and every entry or each and every cell of one list with the other list. So here I will show you three ways to do it. In the first way, it is of prime importance that the list should be in the same order. So for example, here I have Australia, here also I should have Australia. Similarly, all these entries should match. So if you have such a list, then you can use a very simple example, very simple formula, where you would just say this is equal to this cell, B4 is equal to C4, and this would return either a true or a false because this is the logical argument. So now when I press enter, I have true here, and if I double click on it to fill in all these cells, you can see I have trues and falses, and I have falses in cases where the list does not match. So for example, here I have Japan, but here I do not have Japan, I have Kenya. Similarly, here I have Kenya and here I have Kuwait. If I go down, I have UAE here and Malaysia here. So in this case there is not an exact match, and therefore it gives false. Now if you need to quickly identify all those rows where you have this mismatch in the data, you can simply go and apply filter to it. So you can either go to data and click on filter, or you can use the keyboard shortcut Control Shift L. And now when I go here, I can simply select false and hit OK, and as soon as I do this, I would have this entire list where my entries do not match exactly with the entry in the adjacent cell. So this is one way of doing it, very simple, straightforward way. In case you do not want trues and falses, maybe you want to type something, then you can use a simple if formula. So use if formula, this would be your logical test, and if the value is true, then you can write something like matches, and if it is not, then you can write do not match and hit enter. Now it would return matches if there is a match, and if it does not, then it would return do not match. Again, the idea is simple, you can go and sort this by matches or do not match. Now it may happen that you have this exact list, but sometimes you may send it to a colleague, he may sort it, delete a few rows, add a few rows, and when you get back the list, you have something like this. So you have this list sorted alphabetically beautifully, and your colleague gives you a list which is sorted by some other metric, maybe the GDP numbers, maybe anything else. So you may have to identify whether this list, this value, this text here Australia is there in this list or not, and if it is not, then you would need to identify it. So you can use a simple VLOOKUP formula here. If I use VLOOKUP, I would say this is my lookup value, I'm looking for Germany, or maybe say this is my lookup value, I'm looking for these text values, and my table array where I want to look is this entire list. So I would select this entire list, and I would say the column index number should be 1 because this is my array and only has one column, and it should be an exact match. And now when I hit enter, this gives me Australia, which means that this value, this text content here in the cell Australia is present, available, is there in this list. Now if I double click here, you can see that this gives me a lot of not available, which means that, oops, one minor thing, that you need to lock this. So I would have to press F4 so that the range does not change. Now when I press double click, you can see that I have a couple of not available here, indicating that this value does not match. So for example, if I go to France, this value is either not available here or there is something wrong in this case. If I manually scan this, I would see that France is not available in this list. Similarly, if I go to some other value, maybe say I go to Morocco, I would see that this value Morocco is not in this list. I see Morocco is here, but there is a mismatch. You can see that here it is MOROCCO and here it is MOROCO. So there is a mismatch. Now you have this entire list with the value or not available, and you can simply again filter it. I would press Ctrl Shift L. It the filter earlier applied goes away. Now I press Ctrl Shift L to apply the filter on this list, and now I can simply go and select not available, and it would give me this list where I would know that these values, France, Greece, Japan and Morocco, are not available in the other list. So this is one way. Let me press Ctrl Shift L again to get rid of this filter. Again, similarly, you can apply it the other way around. You can have this as the lookup value and look at in this list. You can also do the same thing with match. So I have the same list replicated here, and I can use the match function as well. And match is important because it will not only tell you where is Australia in this list, but it will also tell you what is the position of Australia in this list. So again, my lookup value is here, and my lookup array is this entire column. And I would hit F4 to lock this, and I would want an exact match, so I press 0. Now when I hit enter, this gives me a number indicating that there is a match, and that match is at the 23rd position in this list. Now if I hit double click here, you can see I have this entire list with numbers, and whenever there is wherever a match is not found, it returns not available. This list would tally with this list because these are essentially the same thing, but I'm just showing you a different way of doing it. So now I've used match formula, and if it is a number, then it is a match. If it is not a number, then you get a not available error. Again, you can simply filter it and choose not available to get a list of all those values or entries that do not match. So this is a good way to compare these lists. Sometimes you may have a huge data set, thousands and thousands of rows, where you can use this filtering technique to either manually treat them or delete them or highlight them. Here I have a list of countries, and in this list I have a repetition. So for example, I have Australia, US, Brazil, Canada, China, and again Australia repeats. Similarly, I have Brazil here as well as here. So in this list I have repetitions, and my intent is to get a list of unique entries. For example, I should have Australia only once, I should have Brazil only once, and this should be dynamic, which means that this should be guided by a formula. In case I change this list, then my unique value list should automatically change. So to do this, I would use two formulas. I would use VLOOKUP along with Countif, and I'll show you how to do this. So let me first show you what I'm going to do with Countif. I say Countif, which takes two arguments, a range and a criteria. I would say my range should be C5 colon C5, and I would lock the first one, which means that as I go down and as I drag this formula down, Countif in the second cell would refer to C5 is to C6, and in third row it would refer to C5 is to C7. So this list would keep on getting expanded, and I say my criteria should be this cell C5, and if this is equal to 1. Now let's first see what happens here. When I hit enter and I double click here, you can see that it returns 1 for Australia, 1 for US, Brazil, Canada, China, but as soon as Australia repeats again, it gives 2. Similarly, when Brazil repeats again, it gives 2, which means that it gets incremented, the count increments by 2. I would use this property of count to create a formula that would give me the unique list. So I say if this value is equal to 1, which means that if the entry is unique, then give me the value which is this, which is in blank cell, plus 1, and don't worry, I'll tell you what the logic is. Else give me the cell above this cell. And now when I hit enter, I get 1 here, and when I double click on it, I get these numbers, and these are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But you can see when Australia repeats, the number does not get incremented, it remains 5. Similarly, when I reach to Brazil, and here Brazil was 3, but here Greece is 8, and Brazil, the number does not get incremented, it gets incremented for India. So you can see that wherever there is a repetition, the number is not getting incremented, and I would use this property to get a unique list. But let me first take you through the formula again. I'm saying that this formula should count what is the value in this cell. So in this case I had Australia. You are not able to see this. Let me drag this so that you can see this completely. I hit F2, and you can see I say count if C5 is to C5. So this is my range, and my criteria is Australia. And if this is equal to 1, which is the case, it is equal to 1, then add 1 to the cell above. The cell above is empty. Make sure that it is empty, there is no number in it. And now this value becomes 1. Else give me the value above it. In this case it becomes 1. When I go down it becomes 2, 3, 4, 5. But when I come to Australia and I see this list, it is looking for this entire range, and it is looking the criteria Australia, which is in C10, and this is not equal to 2. If I select this entire thing and hit F9, you can see that this is false. This is false because Australia occurs twice in this list, and hence its count becomes 2. So in this case it would not add a 1 to the number above. It would simply keep the number above. In this case again it simply keeps 5, but when it goes down it increments because this is getting used for the first time. Now I would use this property to get a unique list by using VLOOKUP, and I would say my lookup value should be numbers, because I'm going to look for 1, 2, 3, 4, because these are unique entries, and whenever there is an increment there is a unique entry. If there is no increment there is a repetition. So I would use a rows function here, and I would say rows and d5 is to d5, and I would lock this cell. I would hit F4. Now when I will go down again, this would return 1. If I select this and hit F9, you would see that this returns 1, but when I will go down it would return 2, 3, and so on. Let me control Z and go back, and I would say my array should be this entire thing, this entire list. I would hit F4 to lock this, and the column should be second column, because in this range second column is where the country name is, and I want to return it, and this should be an exact match. And now when I hit enter, this gives me Australia, and if I drag this down you can see this gives me a list of all the unique entries. All the countries are repeated only once. There is no repetition in this list. However, I do have this NA available. You can simply take care of it by using the if error formula if you do not want a repetition, an error. So use if error this value, and if there is an error then give me blank. Now if you hit double click on the autofill, you would see that I have a list of unique countries in this list. If there is a repetition, that is not in this list. For example, here if I change this and I make India and I make this Brazil, you can see that this list has updated itself. I do no longer have India here, I have Brazil, and that is only once. If I change this value and add India here, then you can see a new entry has been created. India comes here and I have UK at the end. So this is how you can get a unique list by using a combination of VLOOKUP, Countif, and rows function. Here I have a list of employees and their total work experience in years. Now I have a job requirement, or I have a project requirement where I need to identify people with the right level of experience. So for example, I need a project, I'm starting a new project, and I would need people who have 2.2 years of experience, or you can say more than 2 years of experience, and I need to identify the right person from this list. Now to do that I can use index formula. So I would use index and I would select this entire range. I would hit F4 to lock this. In row number, I would use match formula. I would match this experience in this list and get the row number. So this would be my lookup value, and my lookup array would be this. Let me hit F4 to lock this, and I want an exact match. And I want to return the employee name, so I would keep column number as 1. Now when I hit enter, this gives me Jenny, because here I can see Jenny has 2.2 years of experience. But what if I say I need people with 2.5 years of experience, 2.5 years of experience? This would return an error because Excel cannot find this value in this list. So to get this, and what I say to find the closest match, I would have to tweak this formula. Instead of looking for this value, I would look for the minimum difference between this value and these values. So for example, if I look at the difference between 2.5 and 9.3, it is huge as compared to 2.5 and 1.7. And if I find this difference for all these values, I would want to identify the name which has the minimum difference in experience. So to do that, let me change this formula a bit. I would say give me the minimum, and I would use absolute formula. Absolute gives the absolute value, whether it is positive or negative does not matter, it gives you the positive value. And I would say absolute of this value minus this entire range, and I would close the bracket. Now if I show you what happens if I only evaluate absolute part, I hit F9, and you can see this gives me the difference between this value, which is 2.5, you can't see it here but it's 2.5, and all these values. So I have 6.8, which is 2.5 minus 9.3, and since this is absolute formula, the sign is always positive. Let me hit Control Z to go back, and if I evaluate this with the minimum value and I hit F9, this gives me 0.3, which means that the minimum difference between this and this value and this range is 0.3, and I want to identify where this difference is 0.3 and get that name. So to do that, I would also have to change the range here, and I would make the range absolute this value, absolute this value minus this entire range. Now if I evaluate only this part and I hit F9, oops, I need to remove this 0, and I would put the 0 here. Now this is the range that I want to look for, and if I evaluate this by hitting F9, you can see I have the same range. Here I have the minimum value of this range, which is 0.3, and here I have the entire range, and what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to match this minimum value in this range. Let me hit Control Z, and let me close the bracket here. Now if I hit Control Shift Enter, this gives me Jenny. Remember, you will have to press Control Shift Enter because this is an array formula. You're using an array within absolute, something which is not supported by absolute function by itself. So you would have to use Control Shift Enter. And you can see this gives me Jenny because here Jenny has 2.2 years of experience, and this is the closest match, which is for 2.5. 2.2 is the closest match in this case. If I make this 2 years, then this changes to Sam because Sam here has 2.1 years of experience. Similarly, if I change this to 7 and hit enter, this becomes Jamie because Jamie has 5.4 years of experience, which is closest to 7 years. So this is how you can find the closest match in a list in Excel. Here I have a list of numbers, so you can see I have all these numbers, and these are not sorted in any particular order, and my intent is to find the last value in this list, so which would be this number. Now, to do this, I can use a VLOOKUP formula, and I would use the approximate property in VLOOKUP. I would hit tab to autocomplete this function, and in lookup value I would have to give a really big number in this case. So I would give 9.999999E plus 307. If you're wondering what is this, this is the largest number that Excel can understand. If the number is bigger than this, if I make it 10e plus 307, Excel would not be able to understand that this is a number. So this is the largest number that Excel can understand, and it becomes my lookup value. Then in table array, I would use this array. I would hit F4 to lock this, although I do not need this in this case, but again, it's a good practice to lock these cells. I would use 1 as column index number because there is only one column, and in range lookup I would use true, approximate match, instead of exact match. If I use exact match, it would return an error because it would not find this number here. But if I use approximate match, so I would use 1. You can also double click on it or type true, but 0 is for false and 1 is for true. And when I hit enter, it gives me this number, which is 1869286. The reason this works is because in case of approximate match, Excel would look through this entire range and it would find the number bigger than this number, and whenever it encounters a number which is bigger than this, it would stop there and give you the value just prior to the bigger number. In this case, it cannot find a number bigger than this. This list does not have it, so it would scan through this entire list, go to the end and give you the last value because it cannot find a number which is bigger than this number. So this is how you can find the last value in a list by using VLOOKUP and the property of approximate match within VLOOKUP. Here I have a list of employees who have chaired a meeting and the dates on which they have chaired this meeting. Now if I'm scheduling another meeting, I would want to know when was the last time Steve chaired a meeting, and if I come to know that it was very recently, I may not want to give him the responsibility. Similarly, I have this drop down list here where I can change these names. I can make it Jane or anything, and I would want to know when was the last time this person chaired a meeting. So to do that, I would use index formula, and within index I would give this column as the array, and I would hit F4 to lock this. And now my intent is to find the last occurrence of Steve and then return that value. In this case it would be this row number 16. To do that, I would use the row function. Row function gives the row number, and in this case I would say a row function of these rows. I would hit F4 and I would multiply this with a condition, and the condition is that this value, the employee name, is equal to the names in this. Now let me show you what you would get if you evaluate this entire thing. Let me first evaluate only the row part. If you evaluate this by hitting F9, you get a list of numbers 4, 5, 6, 7 up till 17, because these are from row number 4 to row number 17. Let me hit Ctrl Z to go back. And if you evaluate this condition, I hit F9, you would get trues and falses. Whenever there's a match with Steve, which is in this case or in this case, then there is a true, else there is a false. Now I hit Ctrl Z to go back again, and if I evaluate these together, because I have this multiplication sign, and if I hit F9, you can see this would give me 0 when there is no match, and the row number when there is a match. So in this case it is telling me that Steve is in row number 10 and in row number 16, and my intent is to find the value in row number 16 from this array. Let me hit Ctrl Z to go back. Now to do this, I would first have to identify the maximum value, which is 16. So I would use max formula. But if I use this, it would give me 16, and I may not have this entire array up till 16 rows because it starts from row number 4. So I would have to subtract 3 from it so that it is now normalized. The first value is row 1 till row 17, or in this case it would be row 14 because I only have 14 entries here. Now when I close this, and I do not need to give the column number because there is only one column in my array, and I hit Control Shift Enter, this gives me 21st September, which is the value for Steve. Similarly, if I change this value, I make it Jane, then it gives me 21st September, which is again the value for Jane. But let's change this. I use Leonard and it is 20th September. So you can see that this is giving me the last value. I use Chris and I get 18th September. I do not get 17th but 18th. So this is giving me the last occurrence. Now if you do not want to use Control Shift Enter, you can also use SUMPRODUCT. I would use SUMPRODUCT here and just close the bracket, and now you can simply hit Enter and it would give you this right result. Instead of using Control Shift Enter, you can use this because SUMPRODUCT can handle arrays while Max cannot, because here we have given an array to Max which it cannot handle, so we had to use Control Shift Enter, but SUMPRODUCT can. So this is how you can find the last occurrence of an item in a list. Here I have the sales rep names and the sales done by them in each of these months in 2013. So there I have data for 12 months for each of these sales rep. Now let me show you how to do a two-way and a three-way lookup using index and match. A two-way lookup is simple, so I would first create a drop-down list, and to do that I would go to data validation, and here I would select list. Do not worry if you do not understand this data validation concept, because I would cover this in the next video. And here I would select the source as this, and this gives me a drop down of all these names. Similarly, I would create a drop down list for the months as well. Again I would select list, and here I would select all these months till December, and now I have this list till December. Now the intent is when I select a sales rep name and a month, the sales value should appear here, which is this value, in this case Joe's sales in February. So to do that I would use index formula, and I would select this entire array, hit F4 to lock this, and in case of row numbers I would use match formula, and I would look for this value Joe in this list, I would hit F4 to lock this, and I would need an exact match. Similarly, in case of column, again I would use match formula to look for February, the position of February in this list, and again this should be an exact match. Now when I hit enter, this gives me the result. Here for Joe in February the sales were 7418. If I change this to June, then the sales become 2150 here. Now what if you do not want to do this by month? What if you want to do this by quarter? So maybe you want to identify what are the sales done by a sales rep in the first month of quarter 1 or quarter 2. So to do that, I would first have to create a drop down list. I would type 1, 2, 3, 4 for each quarter, Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4 in this drop down. So let me go here and change the data validation. I would go here and change the source to this. And now you can see I have 1, 2, 3, 4. As of now the value is not available, but it will work when we change the formula. But I do not want 1, 2, 3, 4 here, and I would show you a very smart custom number formatting trick here. I want this to show Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4. So to do that, I would select this list. I would press Ctrl 1 to open the format cells dialog box, and I would go to custom. And here in before general, I would only add this simple thing, Q in double quotes. And now when I hit OK, you can see that this has become Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4. Mind it that these are still numbers. This still refers to 1. If you look in the formula bar, this still refers to 2, and you can use this in calculation and formulas as we are going to do now. So I would use this in the drop down as I've already done. If you see this now, it gives you Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4. But in this cell, I again see 3 or 4. So if you want to be more intuitive, you can use the same trick here as well. Press Ctrl 1. Go to custom, and here simply add Q in double quotes. Now it will again display Q3. If you select Q2, it would display Q2, and the value would still remain a number. So now I would use this in the formula, and I would use index formula. And in case of array, I would need to give 4 different arrays, and the respective array should be selected when I select the quarter. So to do that, I would use choose formula, and within choose it is asking for an index number. I would select this. So if it is quarter 1, the index number would be 1. For Q2 it would be 2, and so on. And this index number would select that value. So for these values I would give it arrays, and this is my first array. So if it is Q1, this array is selected. If it is Q2, this array is selected, and these are separated by commas. If it is Q3, this array is selected, and if it is Q4, this array is selected. So now my array part is covered, and now I would use again the match trick to find out the position of Joe in this list. I would hit F4 and I would use exact match. And if I want to get the value from the first month of each quarter, I would use 1 here, and that is it. Now when I hit enter, this gives me 8800, which is Joe's value for Q2 first month. April is the first month in second quarter, so it returns 8800. If I make this Q3, then it returns 4817, which is the value here for July, which is the first month in Q3. Similarly, you can do this for other sales rep as well. If you select someone else, if you select Harry, you can go and see that in Harry it is 9116 for July. If you do not want to hard code this value, you can again create a drop down and ask the user to input whether they want it from the first month of the quarter, or second month, or the month of the quarter, or third. So this is how you can do a 3-way lookup in Excel using index and match functions. I have this text string here in cell B6, and the intent here is to count the number of words in this sentence. Now Excel does not have a direct function to count these words, but we can use a mix and match of formulas to do this. And the way to do this is, we would not count the words, but instead we would count the number of spaces between words. So for example, here I have the sentence let the cat out of the bag, and each word is separated by a space. So I would count the space and then I would add 1 to it. So for example, between let and the, there is 1 space. So if I have to count the number of words, then it would be the number of spaces plus 1. So to do that, I would show you in parts how to do this. I would first count the number of characters in this, and I would use the len function. It only takes 1 argument, which is the text, and when I press enter, this gives me the total number of characters here, which is 26. Now I would have to remove all the spaces to know how many number of characters here are without these spaces. So I would use substitute function, and I would use this text where I want to make this substitution. The old text is a space, so I would use space between double quotes, and the new text is blank, so I would use only two double quotes without any spaces. And the instance number, I want to do it for all the instances, so I would leave this blank. Now when I hit enter, you can see it gives me this sentence without these spaces. Now to this formula I would add len, so this would give me the number of characters in the new string. This is my new string, and in this string I'm counting the number of characters, which is 20. Now to find the number of words, I just simply have to subtract the new character length with the old character length and add 1 to it. So this gives me 7, which means that in this sentence, let the cat out of the bag, there are 7 words, which is true because it is let the cat out of the bag. So this gives me the correct answer. Now if you have to combine this entire thing, you can simply add these formulas or combine these formulas. I would first use this here, so let me show you how to do this. Instead of these cell references, I would have this entire formula. Let me type it so that it would be faster. Substitute this text with old text, which is space, and new text, which is blank, and I hit enter, and I would add 1 to this entire thing. So this gives me 7. Now let me apply this same thing to this text here below, where I see there are more spaces. So I would drag this down, I would drag this down, and you can see now the difference is 13. Here it was 6, but here it is 13. If I drag this formula down, this gives me 14 as the answer, which I know is not right because the words are exactly the same. The reason here is simple, that it is also counting the number of characters. Since it is counting the number of characters, it is counting extra spaces as well. So here, if I go and check here in B7, it is this entire thing. But if you only want to have one space between words, we would use the formula trim. And what trim does is it would remove any extra spaces, leading spaces or trailing spaces, and would only leave one space between words. Now if I hit enter, you see I get the same result as above, which is 26. Now this is 20, and if I again simply do the same calculation, this cell minus this cell plus 1, I get the right result. So this is how you can count the number of words in Excel, even if you have unintentional spaces or trailing or leading spaces. This formula is the short way to give you the number of words in Excel. Here I have 3 email IDs, and the intent is to extract the username, which means that here in the first case I would want ABC, in the second case I would want hello world, and in the third case I would want trumpixel. I do not want anything after @ and including @, which simply means that I would have to identify the position of @ in this text and extract anything which is to the left of it. So to do this, I would first use search function. Search function takes 3 arguments. The first one is find text, and in this case I want to find the text @ within text, which would be this entire email ID, and start number is an optional argument. If I leave it, it would start by default from the beginning, or I can specify 1 if I want, but I would leave it blank. Now when I hit enter, it gives me 4 because 4 is the position of @ in this string. Now to get the user ID, all I have to do is simply extract anything which is to the left of @, and I would use left function for it. As I hit tab, you see it takes 2 arguments. One is the text and second is the number of characters. In this case, the text would be this, and the number of characters would be 4 minus 1, because I do not want @, I want to exclude @. Now when I hit enter, this gives me ABC. And similarly, if I drag this down, you can see this gives 11 because 11 is the position of @. Simply in the case of trumpexcel@gmail.com, again 11 is the position of @. And if I drag this down, then this would give me the user ID for these email IDs. So this is how you can do this in Excel. This is a very practical example. I took this example from one of my colleagues who was struggling in doing this. You can apply this same logic if you want to extract the email provider. So for example, if you want def.com, then you can extract the characters which are to the right of @. So this is how you can extract parts of a text string using search and left or right function. Here I want to calculate the first Monday of the month, and I have some data. I have the year here in this cell and the month serial number in this cell. Now, to get the first Monday of the month, I would first have to identify when is the first Monday in that month. What is the date? Is it the first date on which, so for example in this case I have August 2014. Is it the 1st August which is a Monday, or 2nd August which is a Monday, or 3rd day in August which is a Monday? I need to identify that day, and to do that I would use the weekday function. It would not be a direct thing, and I'll have to use a mix and match of weekday along with if. Weekday function takes the serial number. In this case I do not have a serial number, so I would create one using the date formula. Date takes year, month and day as the input. I would use year here as 2014, month as 8, and day I would use 1 because I want to start looking from the beginning of the month. And in case of return type, I would say here are these options. You can start from number 1, which would count Sunday as 1 and Monday as 2, but I prefer the second option, which counts Monday as 1, Sunday, Tuesday as 2, and so on. Now when I hit enter, this gives me 5. Now here I have a table where if Monday is 1, then 5 is Friday, which means that in August the first day of the month is a Friday. So if I go by that logic, if this is the first day of the month, then Saturday would be 2nd, Sunday would be 3rd, and Monday would be the 4th day. So here I have to get 4 so that I can construct a serial number. So to do that I would have to use the if condition, and I would say if this weekday is greater than 1, which means that if it is not Monday, then subtract this by 9. And I'm subtracting this by 9 because if you see here, I have Friday as the first day, and after 4 days I would have Monday, so I would have to subtract 5 by 9. Had it been Saturday, I would have subtracted 6 by 9, and 3rd day would have been Monday. So I have to subtract this serial number, this number which weekday gives me, from 9 to get the number on which Monday occurs in that month. So here I would simply copy paste this formula, and if this is false, then I would keep it as 1. Now when I hit enter, this gives me 4, indicating that Monday is the 4th day in this month. If I change this to September, I make this 9, you can see this gives me 1, which means Monday is the 1st day in September. If you want to go and check with the calendar, you can see that in September Monday is indeed the 1st day. If I go back to August, Monday is the 4th day. If you want to check again, check in July, and Monday is the 7th day. So here if I make this 7, then Monday is the 7th day. Now when I know Monday's serial number, that this is the 7th day of the month, I can create a date again by using the date function, and I would say this is the year, this is the month, and this formula here I would use this for day. And now when I hit enter, this gives me the serial number, and you can see that 7/7/2014, which means that 7th day in September was a Monday. If I change this, I make it 6, then says 2nd day in June was a Monday. If I go back to the calendar, go back to June, I would see that 2nd day indeed was Monday. So this is the formula that you can use to identify what is the first Monday of any given month. In this part of the video, I'll show you how you can extract data using a drop-down list. So here in this cell, I have a drop-down list which has the name of countries. And the intent is that as soon as I select a country, say India, then all the records from India for product 1 and product 5 and product 8, these should populate here. So I should only have the results from India. But as soon as I change this to China, then all the records from China should appear here. This is one of the finest tricks that I've learned in Excel, and it uses a combination of helper column and formulas. So let me first create 3 helper columns. I would have helper column 1, I would have helper column 2 and 3. Now in first helper column, I would simply use these numbers. So I would use the rows function rather, and I would say E5 is to E5, and I would lock the first E5 so that as I go down, the number gets incremented by 1. Now you can see as I go down and I drag this down, these numbers get populated. This becomes 2 because this is row E5 is to E6 now. In the second helper column, I would check for a condition using if formula, and I would say if this value, and I would lock this, is equal to the country here. So does the country here matches the country here? And if that is the case, then give me this number, else give me a blank. And when I do this, and when I double click on the autofill, you can see only those rows which have the matching country gets the number. Everything else is blank. And if I change this from India to China, then all the countries, all the records which have India as the country would get this number. And now here I would use small function, and I would say in this entire array of numbers, and I would press F4 to lock this, give me the first smallest number. So I would use rows function again, and I would say rows G5 is to G5, but I would lock the first G5 so that when I go down, it would give me the second smallest number and then the third smallest number. Now when I hit enter, oops, I forgot to add another parenthesis, but I would just click yes and it would do it for me. Now when I double click on this, you can see that it gives me 1 and 5 here because 5 is the second smallest number, 8 is the third, 13th is the fourth, and 20th is the fifth. And then it gives me this number error. But if I do not want an error, I can simply use the function if error, and this is the value, but if this value is an error, then give me blank. And I hit enter, and now I would double click here, and you can see it gives me these numbers. Now if I go and change this to China, this gives me 2 and 6 because there are only 2 records for China. First one is at the second position and the next one is at the 6th position. Similarly, if I change this to say US, then I have all these records. So helper column does all these for me, and now all I need to do is identify the 4th record details, which is this, and extract and put it here. Similarly, in the second row, I need to identify the details of 7th record and put it here. So to do that, I would simply use an index formula. I would select this entire array, I would hit F4, and I would say the row number should be this helper column number. So I press this, and I would say the column number should be 1. Now when I hit enter, this gives me product 4. If I double click and drag this, double click would not work because there is nothing in the adjacent cells, so I would have to drag this down. And you can see this gives me all the 4 records, product 4, 7, 17 and 18, but I do not want these value errors, so I would use if error here again, and I would say this value, but if this value is an error, then give me blank. And now I hit enter and double click here, and I have all these records here. Now if I need to replicate these records here, let me drag this here, but this gives me all these product numbers because I have to change the column number. Also, I did not lock this cell, so let me do that first. Let me lock the cell going to the right. So I would want to lock the column. I would hit F4, F4, F4 thrice. Now I would just double click here and drag this, and now when I drag this, you can see I have the same product information here. The reason being that I have to change the column number. I have column number here as 1, which is the case because I've just copied this formula. So to make this thing dynamic, I would instead use the function columns, and I would say this column J5 is to J5, and I would lock the first J5. Oops, I need to press F4. Now I'm using J5 is to J5. You can use KL, whatever column you want. The idea is that this should be 1, and when it goes to the right, this should become 2. Now I hit enter. Again, I forgot to close the parenthesis. Let me do this first manually. Now oops, I forgot something. Alright, I need to close the bracket here. Now when I hit enter, This gives me product 4, and I double click here, and now if I drag this to the right, you can see it gives me the right result. It gives me sales rep name and country name. And here is the magic. Now if you change this to India, all the records from India get extracted here, and there is nothing else in this list. If I select China, then all the records from China get extracted. So this is one trick that I often use while I'm creating dashboards or when I have to extract data based on user selection. I hope you found this video useful. Thank you and have a nice day.